Well, hello and greetings. This is The Art of the Ages. I'm your host, Paul Lytle. So there is this poem by Charles Bukowski, who was a free verse poet, and I kind of a self-proclaimed dirty old man. And I tried my best to actually find this, and I take that back. I did not try my best. I did my best that I could without getting up. I actually used to be quite a bit of a fan of Bukowski's work when I was getting into more free verse stuff, and so I have at least one book of his, and I think a CD of him reading some poems, and I was not going to make that much effort to actually go look for these things, but I just recall one of his poems where someone asked him where he gets his ideas. And his response is something like, I get them from an 11-year-old boy that I keep caged in the basement. Um, and that's hysterical to me. Um, because this is the question that writers get asked constantly, as if this is the big secret, right? This is there's like what separates a good writer from just any Joe Blow on the street is that we have found this secret font of ideas, and and so now we're authors, you know, and that's obviously not the case, but it's one of those things that's really talking about that process is really difficult because most of us are not really sure. It's there's some cases where like there's something specific that happened and that sets your mind going, but a lot of times it's not like that at all. So I remember when I was working on the book, The Eighth Power. I had actually started the book years and years and years ago, years before I actually started over and wrote it, and it was quite a bit different, and I just had a few things in mind that I wanted it to be. I wanted to be, well, in that case it was like 6 sections, that equal length sections, and that turned into 8 when I titled The Eighth Power. Funny how that works. And those sections became eventually. I wrote them as one single novel, but I realized that they were pretty self-contained, and so I separated them out into different novels. But I knew there were a couple of things I wanted to do, and I ended up only doing one of them. So I wrote like a massive chunk of this book. It's a long book, and so when I say I wrote like a quarter of the book, this was actually perhaps the longest thing I'd have ever written at the time. I've written longer stuff than that now, most notably The Eighth Power, but other things as well. But at the time, this might have been the longest thing I had ever written, and it was still going. But I gave up because it didn't really feel like it, and when I came back to it, I kind of stripped away the things I didn't like, and I put in the things that I did like, and only one thing remained, and that was that the first section would kind of be the parents' story, and that would lead into the main plot, but that this conflict would start the generation before, and so I kept that part, and just that idea. It wasn't at all the same plot of that first section. And so it kind of grew from there. I in that particular book, I like the title The Eighth Power. And so that naturally is like, well, then I'm going to need 8 sections, because if I do 6 books in The Eighth Power, everybody's going to wonder where the next 2 books are. Right? So, in that kind of sent me on, it's like, okay, well, what is it? Because I had 7 powers laid out in the book and needed an 8th because of the title. Um, and so asking some very like practical questions, like, okay, I have this thing in mind that is very vague. It's very vague, but I feel like this character is desiring something. What is it? This character is going down this path. Why? And that fills out the situation. That leads us to something else and something before. So when I was working on another book that I have not released yet, working on editing that hopefully soon. So I'll hopefully have this one out soon. It's like it started out with like a handful of images and scenes. Like I knew what I wanted the final confrontation to be, and I knew I wanted this particular thing earlier, and I knew I wanted this, and so like I mean it's a quest novel, so I literally got out a piece of paper, and I started drawing like a really crude map with no no borders or anything. It was just lines. Okay, so this is what I have, and then I had this big gap in the middle. So what happens in the gap? And then you start thinking through things. The book, the Yellow Canary, actually started in Boy Scouts because I had, as so many of us had, this bright yellow rain poncho, and we were stopped on the trail, and we were just kind of fooling around. It's like this narrow trail kind of flanked with a lot of trees and such. And I got up on the trees, and there was like a little embankment, and I like jumped down yelling, something like the Yellow Canary attacks. And it was a spur of the moment thing, but I liked it. And so that got me thinking. Even then, it's like, okay, well, what is the Yellow Canary like? And at first I thought because I really like The Tick. For those of you familiar with The Tick, it's just a ridiculous comedy. You're kind of making fun of superheroes, but he's a superhero, and he's just ridiculous. He's just goofy. It's great. It's fantastic. And I thought he was more like The Tick because the cartoon was out about this time. For those who are keeping track of all the different versions of The Tick, because we've had several. And so I thought he was going to be like The Tick, and so it was going to be like a series of just really ridiculous things. But then I started thinking about like later I read Don Quixote, and I started thinking more about that, and seeing the Tick not as just like a goofy comedy character, but a tragic character who has lost his connection with reality. But still has these very noble instincts, and that really started fleshing things out. And so, just continuing the question. So, where do my ideas come from? Well, they're kind of all over the place, aren't they? It's just images I have in my head, experiences I have that I start asking questions about. And I think that the question isn't where do my ideas come from? I think instead the question is, how are the ideas developed? Because we all run into 100 different things each and every day that could be part of a story, that could be part of a poem, could be part of anything. It could be an image. It could be this. So how do we get from that? Because we all have that. I remember, this is going to be the episode where I just reference a bunch of quotes that I really have no idea where they came from. Vague memories. We're gonna find out that I'm not at all quoting like Flannery O'Connor or Charles Bukowski at all, but I'm like quoting somebody else completely. But that's okay. If y'all figure that out, we'll put a correction in the show notes. But I think it was Flannery O'Connor that talked about like this whole instinct of the writer to go experience the world for ideas is kind of ridiculous, that by the time we're adults, we've all had more than enough experiences that could fit 100 books. And she's right. But how do we turn that? How do we turn that into a story? How do we turn that into something deeper? And I believe that's the secret there is just asking questions. You know, we're going to get into, I mean, and we touch on this here and there, we're going to get into the right sort of questions. And by right sort of questions, I mean, you know, what the points that we're trying to get across, are they in line with God's thoughts? Are we thinking God's thoughts after him? We're going to get more into that, and that's not really the point here. The point here is, how do we get from point A, which is something that everyone has, to point B, which is starting a novel, which probably half the population has done, to point C, and that's finishing the work. And that's asking the questions, delving deeper into our characters, figuring out who they are, what drives them, what has brought them into this particular conflict. And once we have that, then we have more than enough backstory to fill in things. And once we get to know the characters, we know how they're going to get from the beginning of their story to the end of their story. And things start filling in much, much quicker and more completely. And a lot of times that initial instinct, we're going to realize it doesn't belong here anymore. That thing that set us on this path. I remember the first, when the original book that turned into the Eighth Power. It wasn't called the Eighth Power then. But the one image I had in my head was of this wizard character outside in a thunderstorm, you know, basically fighting against the god of the storm. And, you know, there's just lightning just sparkling all around him, and it's this just massive show of force and light that he goes through. That is not, there's no scene like that in the Eighth Power. It is not in there at all. Because it's just one of those things that just didn't belong, and so I cut it out. But that's what got the ball rolling. That's the thing that got me hooked in on this, that got me interested in this. And sometimes those things fall by the wayside, and a good writer needs to be wise on when those scenes that he actually really likes are the things that are just messing things up as we go. And so that's kind of the long answer to that question. Where do your ideas come from? Well, ideas come from everywhere. How do the ideas develop? There's a lot of questioning in that. There's a lot of questioning. And there's a lot of time just really kind of digging deep into the characters, especially in those moments where, like, you know, the motivation of like these two forces that are about to collide are not really pushing them quite in that direction. And I have to figure out why. And I have to figure out, okay, well, what do we need to change to get them there? Because, you know, without the conflict, then, you know, this is going to go badly. The whole thing's going to go very badly. So that's what we have. I'm really interested to hear about your process as well. You know, like what, how do we get from like that point A to point B to point C type of thing for you? And I imagine that, like me, not only is it different for every person, but it's probably different for every project. I mean, I wrote one book that I did not plan out. I knew the final scene, and that's all I knew. And I kind of improvised my way through it. I really like it. I have not published that one yet either. working on cleaning some stuff up in it. It's a little messy, as you might imagine, but normally I don't do that. Normally I work from uh, uh, a strict outline, and so yeah, everything I tackle, it's a little bit different. I come at it from a little bit of a different angle, and that's one of the things that makes it fun. But it's also one of the things that makes it really hard to explain when people ask about it. So I'm very interested to hear from you on this. In the meantime, you know where to find us. You might have noticed that we are releasing this on Thursday instead of Wednesday. I actually have several podcasts that I do like on different topics. I don't talk about them all that much because, if they were all on writing, I'd be plugging all of them on this podcast every week. But one's on video games, one's on insurance, and it's one of those things. It's like, the audiences do not always overlap. Let's just put it that way. And so, I was trying to spread these out, and when I put this one on a Wednesday, and scheduling wise, it just really works better as Thursday. So we are going to make a permanent move for this to be on Thursday. My Wednesday evenings to kind of wrap up editing and stuff, much clearer than my Tuesday evenings. And so we're gonna move this on Thursday. I think I'm going to be be able to be much more consistent with it like that. And so I appreciate you waiting an extra day this week for that. So we will catch you next week on Thursday. In the meantime, never stop telling stories to one another. We'll see you then.